Hi, I'm Alicia Jones-McLeod, Executive Director of Challenging Racism and board member here at Arlington Independent Media. We'll be speaking to a candidate for school board in Arlington County, and we will have 3 panelists that will be interviewing them. Let's meet them. One of our panelists is James Lander, former Arlington County School Board member. Also with us is Maggie Sly, Independent Management Consultant. Brian Marquin, Program Officer at Arlington Community Foundation. In this episode, the panelists will be speaking with Miranda Turner, candidate for Arlington County School Board.
Good evening, Miranda. Welcome to our conversation. We'll start with, why do you want to be on the school board and what are you passionate about with regard to our youth?
Thank you for having me. I'm interested in being on the school board because I think public service is really important, and all of the people in this community who I really admire devote tons of time to volunteer opportunities, advocacy, or running for office, or volunteering with PTAs and ACTL and all of these other activities. And as I've lived here, I've gradually gotten more involved in my civic association, in PTAs, on some committees, and in advocacy. And I think that it's an important way to give back to the community and to get more invested and involved in the community. And education has always been where my interests lay. I almost majored in education in college. I did a semester of student teaching at Bank Street College of Education in New York. I decided I was not going to be a very good teacher in my early 20s, and so I went a different route. But my first job, I volunteered as a reader for a 4th grader in Boston public schools. I volunteered in my own kids' classrooms. I've always been interested in education because I think it's really a key part of what makes our meritocracy work, and it's flawed, obviously, but without strong public institutions, particularly education, I think that we would be worse off. And so I have an interest in making our public schools stronger. I really want to see rigorous education for all students. I really want to see use of data to catch kids up who are behind, to close gaps for students with disabilities or English learners, Black and brown students, lower income students. All of that I think is more within our reach than ever because we have the data and we can identify these students so easily, and we've got ideas and tactics and tools and training for effective literacy instruction and all of these things, and we can bring an evidence lens to all of this in addition to an equity lens. And so that's the sort of stuff that I want to focus on if I'm elected to be on the school board.
Miranda, I wanted to ask you about the crisis of mental health that our youth is currently experiencing, and I want to share first a statistic. The most recent Youth Risk Behavior Survey conducted by the CDC showed in 2021, 42% of high school students felt so sad or hopeless almost every day for at least 2 weeks in a row that they stopped doing their usual activities. When you think about the potential for collaboration with the county board, county services, and Arlington Public Schools, what is your vision for what it would look like to collaborate to support our youth in the midst of this mental health crisis?
A lot of things. And I want to give credit to Janeth Valenzuela, who said a lot of this last weekend, and I completely agree with a lot of her ideas and her advocacy around this. One thing that we're doing, which I'm really excited about, is DHS is piloting a program of putting staff into the schools. I believe they're technically behavioral health therapists, but there are now going to be 4 of them located in our schools. And I think that that's bringing the resources to the place where the need is, and lowering barriers to access by actually having it located where the kids are. So that's happening, which is great news. But Jeneth's point was, we did a whole outreach program. We had a whole strategy. We had a huge community reaction and plan and outreach around COVID. And we can do the same thing around mental health. It was, all hands on deck with resources for people so that they understood risk mitigation, that they understood where they could go get a vaccine, outreach into communities for vaccine access, calling on volunteers to run vaccination programs. There was a huge all hands on deck approach that leveraged a lot of county resources like our community centers. And I think we can, if we put our minds to it, we can take the same approach to mental health. And the other thing that she said, which I completely agree with, is opening the school facilities up after school and providing more programming. I'm in Green Valley, and we are, as the Civic Association, talking about this all the time with respect to programming around the John Robinson Town Square, because it's this beautiful new open space and there's almost no programming. And the Drew Community Center has currently only been open from 6 to 9 p.m., Monday through Friday, to the community. That's it. And all of these are places in my specific community where I think we could be doing more, but I think that need and that opportunity is universal. We've got challenges. Money is not endless, and staffing is something that's going to be short everywhere, not just here. I think we have the opportunity also to leverage existing community resources, community volunteers, retired folks, stay-at-home parents, high school students who need engaging activities after school can serve as mentors, reading buddies. Anybody can serve as a tutor with the proper training. Drew was running the Dyslexic Edge Academy for a period of time, and you just need to get trained in these tactics and techniques, that are specific to kids with dyslexia. So I think we can leverage more of our community to partner and provide additional support after school, in particular for kids.
It's a pleasure to speak to you, Miranda. So Arlington County has sometimes been referred to as a system of schools rather than a school system. And that refers to sometimes the variation school to school, implementing policies or executing programs. And so how do you what do you think about that, and how do we create a system where the experience of each student and each family is equitable regardless of the school that they attend?
I do think there's been a lot of progress on this in the last couple of years under Dr. Duran, and my understanding is Ms. Graves is someone who is within central office trying to really address this and even things out across schools. I don't know that everything is ever going to be equitable, but certainly we have really, really different schools in terms of demographic makeup, in terms of community support, and I would like to see APS go farther in trying to equitably support schools where the school community itself may not be able to provide some of the enrichment opportunities that other school communities are able to fund or able to provide through networks of parent volunteers. And I'll give you an example. I'm still involved in the Drew PTA because, it's a new school community since the boundary redraw, and we struggled to get sufficient volunteers, particularly during the pandemic when everything was kind of a struggle. And currently there are opportunities out there for grant money and funding for enrichment programs. And the PTA, we fundraise. We don't fundraise a whole lot. We're not competing with the North Arlington PTAs, but we do have enough to be able to offer to our students financial aid for enrichment opportunities. But we have a lack of volunteers, and we have a lack of folks with the bandwidth to be able to support some of these opportunities that we might otherwise be able to offer. And I think that's the case for tutoring. I think it's the case for after-school enrichment, end-of-year parties and the like. Drew community is coming together. We actually just had this really great recent multicultural night this past week, but there is a serious bandwidth issue there, and that's an equity issue that I think is often kind of overlooked. And you compare it to some of the North Arlington schools where they just have so much in terms of room parents and after-school chess club volunteers and lots and lots and lots of money. So I think it would be something to have a conversation about in terms of how APS can support something of a floor and additional targeted assistance to some of our schools where they may just not have the community support right now for many reasons that maybe we could do something about.
Miranda, Arlington is unique. They spend over $20,000 per pupil. They have a budget of over $600 million. And only 20% of Arlington residents actively has students in the school system. What is your message to the 80% of Arlingtonians who don't actively have students in the school, who don't have students currently in the school system?
Actually, the budget is $800 million now. Wow. It's very, very large. You know, I have two aunts, one of whom was a career public school teacher in Massachusetts, who don't have kids. And my mom just had me. And we have lots of friends and neighbors who do not have kids. And I think most, if not all of them, are still very invested in our public school system because it is about raising a next generation of Arlington residents. And it's about giving children the best foot forward in life that we can. And lots of the folks in the 80% here, I think, you know, many of them benefited from the schools either directly when their children were going through, even if they are not now, you know, parents of APS students, or they benefit indirectly because this community is great, I think, because of all the generations that it has, including our youth. And our strong public schools attract community-minded people. They do attract some families to stay here, and they attract great teachers. And that's a different issue about whether our teachers can afford to live here. But I think everyone in Arlington, particularly with our values, tends to be supportive of a really strong public school system, because even if your own kids are not taking advantage of it right now, I think it's something we're really proud of. I've heard the county manager say APS is the crown jewel of Arlington. So I just think it's part of the type of community that we want to have, and it's one of the main ways that you can advance progressive values is to have an excellent public school system.
Miranda, obviously the pandemic was incredibly challenging for Arlingtonians, for our children, our educators, our families, and the impact has not been felt equally across our county. And so this next question I'm going to ask you, I'd love for you to address it through an equity lens. What role do you believe that the schools should play in addressing pandemic-related learning loss?
I think that the schools should play a big role in doing that. I think it should be a priority. And one of the first things I wrote in to the school board in April 2020 when the schools were closed, and I was in my spacious house with, you know, my husband and the support of a caregiver in my home and my literate children and my good job. And I thought, you know, these packets of paper that are being distributed at Drew that are only in English and Spanish, that are not accessible to kids whose parents have to go to work, who aren't literate yet, are not really sufficient. And I wrote in an email that said, no one can control for equity in the home, but APS stepping out of the equation at that time with no instruction for second graders and younger and no new instruction for the older students, I thought was a mistake. And I think that is fundamentally about equity, because parents like me could step in and try to provide with our own resources, and I did. And I also tried to help others. And I don't talk about this often, but my son's best friend from school, that child's dad drove a taxi. And we negotiated personally for a discounted pod rate when we decided to do a pod. And all three of us, you know, of the other parents agreed to pay more. And the pod leader agreed to discount rates so that we could have this child join in our pod. And that is another equity issue that I think was something that really came out when the schools closed. And so now I think that the schools are reopening and have all of this data and have all of this additional federal and state money. I think we have an obligation to direct it to the students who are behind for any reason, really, but we know there are more students who are behind due to COVID. We know there are students with IEPs who missed hundreds of hours of what they were entitled to under federal law, and their education is going to suffer for it, and their outcomes could be diminished over the course of their lives for it. So I think it's very important that we make a real concerted effort to address learning loss through the school system. I know Governor Youngkin has proposed some sort of voucher alternative, and I don't think that's the way to go. I don't think it would be enough. I don't think it's an appropriate way to address what we have. I think there are partnerships we ought to leverage with tutoring organizations. In fact, I talked to one run by a former Virginia delegate who is starting this virtual approach with very small groups, 1-on-2, 1-on-3, using college students who are interested in going into the education field, so that those students can get their own experience and also help students who need additional instructional time. So I think we should get creative like that. I do think we should devote resources, and I think we should track and monitor our progress and set goals for making progress against this pretty big problem.
So, Miranda, for parents that may not have time to attend a school board meeting or may not always be sure about the role of the school board, what would you say to them about what it would mean to have you on the school board and how you would go about making the next 5 years much more successful than the last 5?
I think there are probably a lot of parents who don't watch school board meetings, whether or not they have the time. What I want to do on the school board is focus on a few priorities, and those are students and instruction and achievement, which I think entails a mental health component, because you've got to be ready to learn and prepared mentally. I want to focus on our treatment of teachers, and I want to make sure our budget is sustainable, which is looking really challenging over the next couple of years. And I want everyone to feel that their school, because of these focuses, that their school is providing an excellent education to their child, and that they understand the report cards that are coming home and they don't have a problem accessing them online, and that they understand the assessments that their kids are sitting through 3 times a year, and that they know who to go to if they have a problem and they feel that their problem is being addressed. And it's one of those things where if it's running smoothly and everyone thinks it's great, that's the outcome. You don't want, anybody sitting around thinking this is so great, but it ought to be in the background. This is a great school. I feel safe sending my kid there. I know my kid's going to be safe in school and after school, getting a good education, and I know what to expect out of my school, how to understand how my kid is doing, and how to, communicate if I feel that I'm not understanding something, and get a clear answer.
Miranda, we appreciate you participating in our conversation. For voters and Arlingtonians who may want to learn more about your position on the issues, where can they find out information about your candidacy and your platform?
Yep, I have a website. It's mirandaturner.org, and you can sign up for a newsletter on the website, or you can just read about some of my thoughts on the issues right there. I'm also on Facebook, Miranda for Every Student, and I have a Twitter handle, which is Miranda for APS.
Excellent. Thank you this evening for participating in the conversation about Arlington Public Schools.
Thank you.
Thanks, Miranda.